Somos annual reading. It's becoming the annual reading of John Nichols and Natalie Goldberg. Last summer was the first. My name is Jan Smith, and I'm the director of Somos, and I welcome you here. It's great to see so many people. And I just want to say that Natalie and John have been reading usually with other people, except for last summer and tonight, for decades, every summer. And the other thing that's really important to know is that despite their acclaim and how prolific they are, this is totally a donation to Somos. I just think that generosity of spirit is wonderful, and I thank them both. In fact, I have this grand illusion that both of them write at least one new book a year so that they can bring us new material. And this year, of course, will be no exception. I want to introduce briefly the person who's now going to introduce John and Natalie. All of you know her, Mirabai Starr. She's the author herself of many, many books. And I believe she was one of Natalie's very first students, decades and decades ago. And many of you know her through her memoir, Caravan with No Despair, God of Love, and her many beautiful translations, as well as many other pieces of writing.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce them both at once, unless you object. ¿Está bien?
Oh, so we're not taking a break?
No breaks.
Oh, no breaks.
Sure. It is such an honor to introduce these two who are not only great mentors of mine, but beloved friends. And I just want to honor Sean Murphy, who would have been standing here doing this tonight, but he had a little medical procedure today. He's fine and well and great, but he would have been here. So I'm going to do a slightly unorthodox introduction and read a blog post that I wrote about each of these people individually over the last few years. Coincidentally, I happen to have blogged about both of these two, and that's what I'm going to read to you by way of introduction. This is from an upcoming book called Wild Mercy. I met Natalie Goldberg when I was 12 and she was 26. Natalie taught English at Donna Hosley School. A dozen ragamuffin kids gathered around her every day, sitting on old kineems that covered the dirt floor of our hand-built hogan, taking turns stoking the fire in the wood stove, while Natalie read to us from the haiku of Basho and Ballad of a Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers. She handed out spiral-bound notebooks in an array of bright colors, assigned us writing prompts like An Unforgettable Meal and The Last Time I Saw My Grandmother, and let us write whatever we felt like. Natalie didn't care about punctuation, nor spelling. There was nothing we were not allowed to say, and the only way we could fail was by failing to be real. My connection with my mentor did not end with that first year in Taos. Natalie went on to develop writing as a spiritual practice and has transformed millions of lives besides mine. Yet we have maintained a close personal bond, and she feels more like family to me than teacher. Natalie has always encouraged me to risk everything to be a writer. Approval, convenience, a stable home life. She has taught me to be my own robust advocate in the publishing business, and she has warned me that other women may find it easier to support my sorrows than my successes. I I do not always agree with Natalie, who is shocked when I suggest that she can be a teensy bit bossy. But I never doubt her wisdom or her love. She can be blunt to the point of rude, doting to excess, as still as a mountain, or bursting with childlike joy in the face of the most ordinary phenomena, dahlias in a cup, a flourless chocolate torte, a poem about a frayed sweater. For many years, and then, I wrote this a long time ago, and then you had a frayed sweater in your new memoir. For many years, I resisted Natalie's mentorship. It felt like she had me frozen as a troubled 12-year-old hippie kid. You always had this look of consternation on your face, she told me recently. I wanted her to acknowledge my progress as a street-smart meditation practitioner in my teens, an adoptive mother to abused children in my late 20s, a real writer once I had my first piece published in The Sun in my 30s, and a bona fide author when my translations of the Christian mystics came out. And she did, sort of. But I was always her little Paula, my name until I was 15. And I always will be. And you know what? I have come to appreciate it. I love being Natalie's darling protege. I love when she brags about me to her friends and students. I cherish having a woman in my life who has been here for every major passage, deaths, divorces, public accolades, and private anguish. My mentor's insights and sensibilities are so tightly woven with my own at this point, I could not tease them apart if I tried. And I don't want to. I feel lucky to be entwined with Natalie Goldberg. So in addition to being my mentor and mentor to many of us in this room, she's also the author of 14 books. And I think most of you know, but some of them are Writing Down the Bones, Wild Mind, The True Secret of Writing, Thunder and Lightning, Old Friend from Far Away, The Great Spring, Long Quiet Highway, The Great Failure, Living Color, Top of My Lungs, and many more. So what do you think? Should we reintroduce John? All right, I'm going to do it. I won't second guess it. So this is a blog post I wrote about 5 years ago called Enlightened Atheists. The other day I had an unusual and very special guest come to speak at my religious studies class. Author and activist John Nichols. It was unusual for at least a couple of reasons. One, John is pretty much a recluse and rarely appears in public. And two, it is a course on Christian scriptures, and John is an atheist. There are atheists I know who more fully embody godlike qualities than any self-proclaimed believer. John Nichols is one of them. A passionate voice for human rights over the past 5 decades, John has gradually softened into someone who does not merely rage against the injustices of humanity, but lives the teachings of love and compassion we find in the great sacred scriptures of the world's religions. I have watched John's ego identity, much as I have witnessed Ram Dass's, melt in the warmth of a life lived for the sake of love, until he simply exudes that radiance. Like any saint, John Nichols has become love. I had suspected this from afar for quite some time, but the other day I bore witness to it up close, and all I could do was to bow inwardly at his feet. So I was really curious to see how my atheist friend, John Nichols, might rock the boat when he came to visit my class. The reason I invited John, you might be wondering, was because our class was discussing Christ's Sermon on the Mount, which comprises the majority of his teachings on social justice, compassion, and forgiveness, and tying this into liberation theology. I discovered at my friend Sean Murphy's birthday party a few days before, while sitting next to John Nichols at dinner, that John had been very involved in the sanctuary movement in the early 1980s. I had too, as an interpreter for Salvadoran refugees. John had spent time in Central America and had been deeply impressed by the powerful faith of the people and how their religious beliefs were inextricably entwined with their revolutionary activities. As it turned out, my radical activist friend did nothing to shake up or in any way offend my conservative students. Instead, he told wonderfully engaging stories of his own adventures, and in the end, tied it all into what is most beautiful and liberating about the teachings of their beloved Jesus. They were totally captivated, and so was I. And all the while, John exuded this loving kindness, humility, and wonderment in the face of the human condition. His visit changed something deep inside all of us. That is enlightenment. That is radical and revolutionary action. I am the one who's broken free of my prejudices and preconceptions. At the feet of an atheist, I have caught a glimpse of God. John Nichols has written 22 books, and a few among them are the Milagro trilogy, Milagro being Field War, Magic Journey, and Nirvana Blues. My heart belongs to nature. Last beautiful days of autumn, If Mountains Die, On Top of Spoon Mountain, and Sterile Cuckoo, and so many more. And I love you both. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mirabai. That was beautiful. Thank you. And always thank you to Somos. And I say this every time, there's nothing like Somos. I live in Santa Fe now, and definitely nothing there for local writers. And I've been around the country a lot. And besides, what's the matter? Oh, besides Minneapolis, there isn't anything in the country like Somos. So please keep supporting it. And it's a pleasure to keep supporting it. I think John feels that way too.
Yeah.
So I have a new book out that came out actually a week ago. Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. I read from it last year. I'm going to read a little from it this year, and then I'm going to read from something new I'm working on. But before I start reading, everybody, when you have a new book out, what do they do with me? Oh, I love your book, Writing Down the Bones. That book came out 33 years ago. I'm not complaining. It opened a lot of doors for me. I'm glad it helped people. But as a writer, I'm a little sick of it. No one mentions any other book. And I thought about that, and I thought about me reading with John, and people saying, where are you going in Taos? I said, oh, I'm going to read with John Nichols. Who's that? Oh, he wrote Milagro Beanfield. Oh, yeah. And I thought, John is often in the same position. So I decided to do a little touting of another book of his that I adore, and that I think is a quiet book that sort of slipped by and is really beautiful. An Elegy for September. That came out in 1992, a long time ago. And I actually think I wrote about it in one of my books, but I can't find which one. But I could almost bet $100 that it's in some book of mine. So I just wanted to say that I spoke to his friend, Renee Gregorio, recently, and we were talking about Elegy for September. And she said that she had a conversation with him where he really wanted to really just write about the fall, about autumn in New Mexico and in Taos. But he realized he had to throw something in, like a story. So he threw in a love story. But anything you open in this book, and I want to read just a little bit, is full of the knowledge of this area. Chapter 9. He loved calling her attention to things. That's his lover, who is way younger than him. Under dead aspen trees lying across their path were piles of fresh sawdust caused by hungry bugs excavating beneath the blackened bark. At the seeps, he could usually find deer tracks. He never missed a feather on the ground of a flicker, a junco, a Steller's jay. A ruptured stump had probably been torn apart by a bear hungry for ants. Aspen saplings had been broken about chest high by deer cleaning their antlers. He identified butterflies, alpines, an angle wing, two fritillaries. hope I got that word right. And birds, more specifically, right this moment, a flock of siskins pecking at yellow thistles. He could have observed for hours as they sent a fusillade of feathery tufts drifting across the narrow canyon into evergreen branches above the creek. When he tarried at a clump of delicate white mushrooms, half submerged in tall green grass, she asked, "Are they poisonous?" "I don't know." She nudged her toe forward and casually rent them asunder. "They don't look poisonous." He envied her casual annihilations. He would have enjoyed some freedom from the weight of his conscience. It might have been exhilarating to participate in the voluptuous trashing of life. So I think you should all run out and get it. Elegy for September. It is really beautiful. And when I was looking for something in it, I ended up spending an afternoon 2 days ago reading the entire book again. You can't put it down. It's very simple. So now when someone says, I went to a reading with Natalie Goldberg, you can name one of my other books. And with John, you could say Milagro Beanfield War. Oh yes, Elegy for September. Very fine book. So I wanted to just do that for you, John. He's written many books. And this one is a beauty. And if you live in New Mexico or want to know about New Mexico, read that book. It's so specific. And you know it's a lived life here. So I'm going to read just 2 parts that I haven't read before. What didn't I? Oh. 2 parts I haven't read before in Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. One of them is a short piece, really, and it mentions Sean Murphy, who Mirabai mentioned was going to introduce us and has surgery. So I want to keep his presence here. So I'm going to read a short part. And I think I'm being a little glib about this book. It's about cancer, a memoir about cancer. But it's not just about cancer. It's about how you handle tough times. So this was a short chapter where I found out that nothing I was doing for 6 months was working. It all looked like it was working, and then it turned out none of it was working. And in that time, the cancer had completely covered my body. So I'm going to just read a short book. I woke at 6:30 a.m. with a need to get out of the house. I put on clothes and walked out the door. I had no energy. I walked the pace of a snail, the sun still behind a mountain, the light bleak, 1 foot after the other down the Cerro Gordo dirt road. After 20 minutes, I passed Upaya Zen Center, normally less than a 5-minute walk away. I heard the wooden Han calling students for Zazen. I went a little farther to a farmhouse. I knew the German owners were away. A little bit more, and then I couldn't go farther. I stopped, sat down right there on the side of the dirt road. A white car slowed. "Hey, Natalie, I saw you earlier, always practicing, doing slow walking, huh?" He was so cheerful. I looked up, could barely raise the corners of my lips. "Yeah." The white car rolled away and accelerated. Dust rose from its wheels. Zen practice is for people with energy, not for the soon-to-be corpses, I thought. I glanced at the road. Was I seeing right? A bull snake 6 feet long, fat in the middle, pale yellow with large spots, was making its way across. I knew these snakes. Once when I lived up on the mesa in Taos, I found one curled on my zafu in mid-afternoon when I opened the Zendo door adjacent to my studio. In a panic, I called my friend Sean, who drove his rickety van over the potholed road to my place. Like a snake charmer, he let it wind itself over his extended arms. Then he carried it out into the sage. From Sean, I learned that bull snakes were big but harmless. Cerro Gordo was not a busy road, and at that hour, few cars passed. But it would take only one to bounce over that snake to kill it. I was too tired to get up. I crawled into the road and lay parallel to the snake, 6 inches away. They'd have to kill me first. Up close, I could see the snake had whiskers on either side of its nose. "Come on, baby," I whispered into the desolate air, the desolate day, this desolate life. "Move, keep going." Its face crawled past me into the dried, prickly ragweed at the edge of the road. Its long, gracious body followed. I wound my way up to standing and walked home. And then I'm going to read another part. Okay, this is near the end when this is an odd chapter. I like it, so I thought I'd take a chance. I haven't read it before anyplace. That I finally worked my way out of cancer, and I had just found out that I was clean. Not forever, but that I had a chance to live again. I didn't know how long, and I was really happy. But I have to say that after bouts with cancer, people expect you to act normal. And really it's like an Iraqi war veteran coming back and having to go to 7-Eleven. You know, the world is very different after cancer. So this, I'm going to read this. During the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about my parents, reaching back to when I was young. How my father carried loneliness the same way another person carried his royalty or her athleticism. His loneliness was big, broad, and open. He sat in the middle of it, never trying to break its spell, never struggling outside its circumference. It didn't have a grip on him exactly because he didn't fight it, didn't deny its place in the human plenitude. Even in the middle of family gatherings, with all of his blood relatives from Brooklyn at our dinner table, he was in an independent sea. My father faced one of life's truths squarely, and because of that, there was an authority about him, a wisdom and a plague. People were afraid of him, of what he'd say, because he was fearless. His second shoe had already dropped. He was no longer trying to defend something, keep up appearance, be someone. I'm not sure how he came to this, but seeing it all of my life had a potent influence. I wanted that freedom. Maybe fighting in the war, or the rejection of his Orthodox Jewish parents, or the opening of the camps, that a human life could be considered worthless, that his brooding single distrust, his wariness affected him. But it also created a humanizing independence. I remembered him when I was a child. He'd become a champion swimmer in high school, using the crawl to go farther out than anyone was allowed to at Jones Beach into the rough, salty expanse. My mother was just the opposite. She could not face her sorrow, never attempted to turn around and see what was chasing her. in and out of the discount stores every single day, searching for peace in a blouse, for happiness in the right dress or shoe or tablecloth. Who could blame her? There was no guide into a promised land. The woman ached. A terrible disappointment engulfed her, and I beheld it. The harder it pushed, the faster she ran into the brand new, hopeful discount megastore they built on Long Island. No driving distance was too great. Her foot on the gas pedal and the windows opened in the humid summers. What was her sadness? I could give a litany. She was smart, but no one thought of sending her to college. She loved color, pattern, texture, but her only outlet was in the endless rows of store clothes. The man she really loved, Eddie Smith, the next-door neighbor, forsook her after he came home from the war. My father was found on the rebound, sitting in a hammock on his brother Sam's run-down estate in Bayshore. My mother's parents were renting a summer cottage on the premises. What is love anyway? You recognize the loneliness in someone else, or the hope of losing it with them. I saw the outlandish connection of my mother and father, one of those couples that never belonged together. She wanted riches. He was happy with 2 pairs of shorts. She only cared about what others thought. He never gave thought to another's needs. But now I saw something I never understood before. In the song of the world, they contained each other, kept each other in check. They weren't happy, but in the hollow of my father, my mother's unattainable peace was held in place like a lock clicked shut. One twisted to the left, one to the right. In this way, they balanced each other. On a Tuesday at 3 a.m., deep under the covers, but unable to sleep, listening to the tap-tap of bare branches against the window pane, the endless tick of the clock on the nightstand, trying to trace and make sense of my life. I saw that I carried their suffering in my own cells, compounded by my own. Where were my parents now? Gone. Where will I be? Gone. How to make the best of my time left? Who am I? Quickly, without thinking, what is your original face before your parents were born? Whole continents have never heard of a Zen koan, this puzzle revealing truth. Still, the dilemma continues. How to live when the ground has been taken away. No more mother or father. No more energy of youth. No more dream of infallibility. No more health. The wind is blowing hard outside. The sun high and full. 3 times I have applied lip balm in the last 2 hours. Dry with no promise of rain. Earlier today, I was reading William Faulkner's Light in August. Whatever he wrote, whatever agony he lived, whatever prize he won, he too is gone. Sure, we remember him, but where is William Faulkner? So now, I'm going to read something from a book I'm working on. I have no title for it. I think it's about, I've spent a lot of time in Japan. I've studied Japanese Zen for 45 years. And the book, interestingly, is about haiku, but not in the normal sense of the word. And it's interesting that Mirabai, I was teaching Basho, the great haiku writer, in Donna Hosley when I was 26 years old. And I discovered him there. you must have heard of the haiku. What is it? And I never understood it. It took me a year of studying it. Old pond, frog jumps in, water sound. Here's one you might understand. If you understand, I want to know, because I've been in Japan where they all think it's the greatest poem. Here's another one by Basho. Morning glory, another thing I will never know. So when I was living as a hippie in Taos in 1976, I saved up enough money and drove up to Boulder for 6 weeks to study with Allen Ginsberg. And Allen Ginsberg, this has haunted me forever. Allen Ginsberg said that the only real test of a haiku is that while you hear one, you feel a little sensation of space. And then he paused and said, which is nothing less than God. And then he told us at the time there were only 4 great Japanese haiku writers, Basho, Busan, Issa, and Shiki. Now, I somehow took off on this, and I've discovered some women, but I did follow through with Basho, Busan. It's a long story. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm totally lost in this one, but I really like it. So I got to Shiki, the 4th one, and I started studying Shiki too. And I'm going to read you about Shiki, okay? And I hope it makes sense. You're going to be my test. I remember a haiku by Shiki, the least known of the 4 mentioned in that Ginsberg class. Coxcombs must be 14 or 15. I heard this haiku at least 20 years earlier. What could it mean? It was so odd, it caught me the way Basho's frog poem, Old Pond, haiku did. Shiki's haiku too was flat, had to be worked for me to feel its essential nature. I didn't even know what a coxcomb was. A nearby neighbor of Shiki's planted about 4 fat ones as a present in Shiki's garden. Shiki was an invalid with tuberculosis. At 13, he coughed up blood for the first time. The last 5 years of his life, he was completely bedridden, suffering excruciating back pain, fevers, festering tubular boils, and according to his own description, swollen ankles and legs, diarrhea, ingestion, and flatulence, nosebleeds, eyes so painful he needed sunglasses to read, terrible headaches, only free from pain when he took morphine, but the amount was restricted so that relief didn't last long. When I tried to stand, the hinges of my back are bitterly cold. I'm not sure what hinges are, but the message in this haiku gets across. His mother and sister cared for him, though when interviewed years later, they clearly had no idea that he had developed into a haiku master with many disciples, and though born of a drunken father, and he himself was inarticulate, slower in learning than his early classmates, he had become a scholar of modern Japanese literature and language, surrounded by his adoring students. They only remembered him as skinny, weak, ill, fragile, funny-looking, not that smart. I have a photo of Shiki. First it was on my altar, and now on my desk from his last years. He's sitting at the edge of a tatami after dragging himself from bed to gaze serenely out at the garden. The little garden is my universe, and its plants and flowers have become the sole material for my poems. Basho trekked in the wilderness to receive his haiku, and Shiki sat alert at the edge of the garden. The gift of the coxcombs suddenly appearing full-grown in the garden must have caught his attention. I now know they are those odd, ruffled, velvety, convoluted flowers growing in bunches, looking like flames, a compacted or crested-like head, plume-like, and can be yellow, orange, or hot red. I like to think Shikis were red, the color of lust, desire, blood. Close up, they look like a brain. So full of life, middle of summer, that those coxcombs were contemplated by this very sick man, everything aching. Shiki was able to meet that thriving abundance and then coolly, with equanimity, muse over the number of dense, close petals, trusting his mind, allowing uncertainty. Coxcombs must be 14 or 15. I could never, when I first encountered this haiku, understand all this. I had to study his life, learn the plant, care enough. His haiku was then not momentary relief, but something that walked with me. I'd nod my head occasionally, back and forth. 14 or 15, nothing secure, no need for his mind to be firm or sure. He achieved ambiguity and life and death quietly juxtaposed, vital flowers next to this diminishing life. One is growing, one is wasting away. At the same time, the haiku is modern, conversational, banal, unassuming, almost like a whisper. The haiku required me to come very close to him. Shiki, wait, okay. Yeah, okay. Now I'm going to read some more of Shiki's work. Spring departing, no wife, no child in this grass hut. Oceans and mountains way beyond 17 syllables. Nearing death, even louder, autumn cicadas. Spring rain, I close my umbrella and take a walk. Plum blossoms, one sprig in my medicine bottle. Stifling heat, tangled in confusion, I listened to thunder. Was going to steal a melon. Instead, I took the cool breeze. Winter camellia, using all its strength, blooming red. You could feel how he's talking about himself in this last haiku, his huge effort to live and assert his vision through the camellia that pushes to bloom even in cold, clement weather. So, I don't know if it got across or not, but Shiki died at 35, and he's considered the father of modern haiku. And it's because of him at the beginning of the 20th century that we have haiku now. Because he allowed things like ordinary things. He writes about a toothpaste. And he also said you can use the I word, which in Japan is never used. And that really fits in with the modern world, because we love to talk about ourselves. So it goes on, and I don't know if I conveyed it in this part of what I read, but his last 5 years, I think I'd say it someplace, his last 5 years, he couldn't, he was so sick he couldn't get out of bed, and he'd drag himself on his arms to the edge of the tatami mat and spend all day looking out at the garden, waiting for haiku. So that's what I'm struggling with right now. A book, I have to say I'm struggling with it because there are many dimensions. I wrote 100 pages and had it typed up. I handwrite everything still. Had it typed up, and it turned out it was only 100 pages of manuscript. And I said everything I thought I knew. So I have to dig deeper and find more. So it's gotten harder. But maybe we'll talk about writing later. I'm going to read you one more that we don't know if Busan wrote it or Busan or Shiki. And I asked Kaz Tanahashi who wrote it, and I said, I'll find out, I could do research. He said, don't do any research. Let us live in the mystery. So this haiku is by Busan and Shiki. I go, you stay, 2 autumns. Thank you.
Hello, my name John Nichols. Wrote Milagro Pinto. Thank you, Mirabai, so much, but I think you may have had the other John Nichols that came to your class to speak with your students. Natalie, your story about the bull snake on the road and lying down in it. When my daughter Tanya was born in 1970, she was born in the Embudo Clinic, south of town, 20 miles. And the day after she was born, I was driving out of Taos to pick up her mom and Tanya, the day-old baby. And there was a large rattlesnake trying to get across the road. And I thought it was surely going to be crushed by all the cars coming down. And it was a diamondback rattlesnake, almost 6 feet long. And I stopped my car, and I got out of the car, and I got a stick or a cane or something and kept trying to push the snake back, turn it around, get it off the road. And it insisted on trying to cross the road. And I remember stopping for about 10 minutes, trying to get it to change its direction. And it did not want to change the direction. I did not want to get bitten. And finally I kind of looked up, and on the other side of the road, like 3 or 4 cars had stopped. Men had gotten out with tire irons and stuff, waiting for me to stop trying to get the snake across the road so they could kill it. And when you lie down in front of the snake, I think of Tiananmen Square and that kid in front of the tank, way, way long ago. So that was very moving to me. Last Thursday, I walked into Brodsky Bookshop and I saw Natalie's book out in front and bought it and read it that night. And in one reading, one sitting. And I think it's an incredibly beautiful, gentle book that's just full of power. And Natalie and I have gone through a lot of medical situations in life, but this is a really inspiring book, just spiritually how to deal with illness. And it's also a great book about not to let the medical system fuck with you too much. And Natalie succeeded, and boy does she have strength. Okay, this is a reading. I'm working on a personal memoir. I'm calling it I Got Mine. And it's just a jumble thoughts going from being age 5 to being age 70 to being age 13 to being age 29, and it just moves all over the place, and it's totally incoherent. And probably, I'm sure it will never get. The difference between Natalie and I is that, yes, she writes a book every year, but she publishes them. About once every 10 years, I publish one of the 10 books I've written over that time. So anyway, here goes nothing. Just in case you haven't been paying attention, let me give you a bird's eye view of the years I've just described. I'm going to rewind the tape and play it again faster. Here goes. I'm working on 2 novels and 2 screenplays, and I'm doing a nonfiction book too. I fly to Los Angeles and meet with Louis Mal. Then I fly to Oakland and do a signing at Cody's bookstore in Berkeley. I fly back to LA for another signing and a meeting with the producer, Eddie Lewis. It's the 1980s, and in my 40s I have more energy than a hummingbird. I fly to Albuquerque to do a benefit for the upcoming Writers Union Conference in New York. I give a talk in Las Cruces against the Reagan administration. I fly to some meetings with Robert Redford in Provo, Utah. Louis Mal comes to Taos and I give him the tour of 2 days. He's directed films like Pretty Baby and My Dinner with Andre, and now he's intrigued by my novel The Magic Journey. I'm working with Redford on a Milagro script. I'm a busy little beaver. I fly to New York for another meeting with the Greek director, Costa Gavras, on our new script, The Magic City, an original. It's about science and human values in the 20th century. On my 1981 book tour, I fly to Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area again, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Austin, Dallas, Chicago. Up high, I'm terrified of even modest turbulence. Once I grabbed the hand of a guy sitting next to me, and although startled, he let me hold his hand until the plane landed safely. I apologized profusely. He replied, "No problem." I tried to write a nonfiction book and another screenplay. I always get the drafts of the various scripts in on time. Because Louis Mal is courting Candace Bergen back in New York, we have to stop at every payphone doing our tour of Taos so we can call her. I tap my fingers impatiently on the steering wheel while they palaver. I have a prolapsed mitral valve and asthma. In case things get out of hand, there's an adrenaline needle always ready in my fridge. Never do I forget to carry a Ventolin inhaler. I get tachycardia attacks and bad atrial fib. When I have the tachycardia or AFib attacks, I perform the Valsalva maneuver. You squeeze yourself downward as if constipated and trying to move your bowels, and that stops your heart, then it restarts again in sinus rhythm. I drink a lot of Jack Daniels before my meals and wine with the meals and beer. I seem to have a great capacity. I'm used to my fucked up heart. I've been on and off of heart pills like Digitalis, Digoxin, Tenormin, Quinaglu, Verapamil, Carvedilol, Naloxone, Triamterene, and Lasix since I was 34. I sense that I'm indestructible, and I also sense that I might drop dead tomorrow, but who cares? C'est la vie, carry on. The Writers Guild went out on strike in 1981. I wrote a nonfiction book, The Last Beautiful Days of Olive, in 6 weeks. It's illustrated with my own photographs. When I'm Taos bound, I go fishing all the time on the Rio Grande. I go on photographic expeditions. I hunt doves and grouse all September, and I work every night. If my kids Luke and Tanya are in Taos for the summer, I play with them, and when they sleep, I type. I sleep very little myself. I juggle. I'm always exhausted. My friend Mike Kimmel comes out to hunt and fish with me, and when he sleeps, I type. I develop Meniere's disease. I have vertigo attacks. I vomit. I go on a no-salt diet. I take diuretics. They're great for my heart. 1981, 82, 83, 84, I fly to Paris to work on a film. I start rewriting a script for the Czech-British New Wave director Carol Rice. I go back to work on the Milagro Beanfield War screenplay. I'm trying to finish a novel, American Blood, a nonfiction book on the Mesa. American Blood's about the violence that underlies our culture. On the Mesa is about solitude, serenity, quiet. Which one will the fountain bless? Sometimes I lie in bed at night and remember my first experience with Hollywood when I was 26 and 7. I'm having dinner with Liza Minnelli and her husband Peter Allen on location at Hamilton College, my alma mater, for my first published novel, The Sterile Cuckoo, directed by Alan Pakula. Summertime, 1968. Liza keeps giggling nervously and flopping her head over into my lap. When we first met, she explained that she'd read The Sterile Cuckoo once a week for a year. Even today, that seems a tad excessive. She would receive an Academy Award nomination for her role in The Cuckoo. Still, it's 1968 and I can't feel good about the movie because of the Vietnam War and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. America is falling apart. Alan Pakula is dead now. He died at age 70, driving on the Long Island Expressway near New York, when a 7-foot length of pipe lying in the road, kicked up by the car ahead, crashed through his windshield and killed him. My first day in Hollywood working for Alan, I met Natalie Wood and Robert Redford and received a hefty jaywalking ticket for crossing Sunset Boulevard against the light. Natalie and Bob were making a film that Alan produced called Inside Daisy Clover, directed by Robert Mulligan. I seem to recall that Natalie was having an affair with David Lang, the younger brother of Hope Lang, a successful actress who was married to Pakula. I had dinner at their house in Brentwood, and afterwards Alan walked me down the gated community drive flanked by palm trees to the security station where a taxi awaited me. On our walk, I complained to Alan. Suddenly my life was too complicated. I had just gotten married. My first novel was popular. My second novel would soon come out. New York publishing politics were way more cynical than I expected, and now he'd hired me to write a screenplay. Life had been simple before, and today I felt like a fish out of water. Pakula told me gently, "Get used to it, John, because that's the way the rest of your life will be. Ain't that the truth?" Alan had produced many films, including To Kill a Mockingbird. But he went on to direct Clute. The Sterile Cuckoo was the first movie he ever directed. He went on to direct Clute, All the President's Men, and Sophie's Choice. I often think about that flying piece of lead pipe suddenly appearing out of nowhere and killing him. One night, about 15 years later, the sommelier opened a bottle of expensive wine at the throne table of Ma Maison in L.A. for our host, Jack Lemmon, and his wife, Felicia Farr. They're dead now. Costa Gavras was at the table, and Eddie Lewis, too. It's 1981. Costa Gavras is Greek, but Paris is his hometown. He's the director of State of Siege and Z. Eddie Lewis was the producer of Missing, which received 4 Academy Award nominations in 1982 and the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Long ago, Eddie helped break the blacklist by getting Dalton Trumbo's name on Spartacus. Eddie's the one who called me on the phone and asked me to rewrite Missing for Costa Gavras. It won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, but the Writers Guild arbitrated me out of a shared credit. Back then, I spoke better French than Costa spoke English, so a lot of our discussions were in French. Costa always stayed at the Marina Pacific Hotel in Venice, so during our breaks, I could go swimming or listen to a one-man band pirouetting on roller skates, or I could stroll on the boardwalk watching girls in pink satin short shorts and skimpy bandeau tops who were so unbearably attractive they made me want to commit suicide. Switch man to May 1982. I'm in Paris working with Costa on our second film together, an original called The Magic City. It's all about science and human values during the 20th century. First, I spent almost a year researching the project, reading books, talking with atomic physicists, cutting out magazine articles, watching documentaries. I compressed, I can see now, all the material into a Bible of information which Costa could study. Then I wrote a handful of treatments. After that exercise, Costa asked me to cobble the treatments together as a novel. So I wrote the novel. Finally, he gave the okay to produce a first draft screenplay. However, Costa didn't much like my script, switched me over to our next project, a film based on the novel War Day, written by Whitley Strieber and James Konetka. Briefly, it's all about the United States 5 years after a limited nuclear exchange between America and the Soviet Union. New York City gets flattened at the start of the book, but a lot of the damage around our country occurs from Soviet bombs exploding high in the atmosphere over America, and their electromagnetic pulse shut down the electronics all across the nation. Planes fall out of the sky, cars don't start, computers don't work, the banking system collapses, and so forth. Easy to put in a screenplay. Only 7 million United States citizens were killed, but 5 years after the war, our society and our environment are pretty much totally fucked. Plus, the Soviets and the rest of the world have suffered equally. It's a vision of Armageddon that sets your teeth to clacking, and mine also. Think Mad Max. Think Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Jump cut to Provo, Utah. Theoretically, I'm working with Robert Redford on the Milagro Beatfield War script, but he's hard to pin down, so Bob invited me to fly up from New Mexico to the first Sundance Institute, June 18 through 24, 1981. He'd be at Sundance for those days, enabling us to spend a fair amount of time schmoozing about the Milagro screenplay. Great, except the Writers Guild went out on strike, so we couldn't talk. I could not even sit down with Bob and eat an enchilada for fear that would be considered scabbing. By the way, it's no disrespect to call Redford Bob. That's the way he wanted. In fact, we all called him Ordinary Bob because he wanted so much not to stick out like a sore thumb, which of course was impossible given his fame. Anyway, the director Sidney Pollack and Redford were friends. Pollack had directed Bob and Jeremiah Johnson 3 Days of the Congo, The Way We Were, The Electric Horseman, Out of Africa, blah, blah, blah. At the end of that first Sundance Institute, I hitched a ride with Pollack from Provo up to Salt Lake City Airport. The entire way our rental car was trailed by a Utah State police car. Therefore, Sidney had to obey the speed limit, which drove him crazy. What really drove him nuts was the fact that Robert Redford was always late. Late to meetings, late to the set, late to makeup, late to dinner, late to everything. The entire way to Salt Lake City's airport, Pollack kvetched about Redford's psychotic tardiness. He was practically apoplectic. At first I figured Sidney hated Robert Redford for that, but about 20 minutes into our voyage I realized that they truly loved each other. So one day, I guess perhaps the spring of 1982-83, I'm supposed to meet Redford at his rental house in Santa Fe. Our meeting is planned for 1 p.m. This is my recall of that said occasion. I drive down from Taos, conscientiously arrive at Bob's house exactly on time, 1 p.m. Nobody's there, but the door is open. So I walk inside, commandeer a comfortable chair, waiting for the director to arrive. 15, 20, 25 minutes, nobody shows. Since there's a remote lying on the coffee table before me, I click on the TV and watch something. Oprah, Jerry Springer, an episode of Bonanza. And I'm hungry. I get up, peruse the kitchen refrigerator. I make myself a bologna, cheese, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with mustard and mayonnaise and pop open a beer. Proceeding to the outdoor port towel, I make myself comfortable gazing at the placid swimming pool while I eat. I'm in heaven because that sandwich and cerveza contain all of my favorite food groups. After finishing the sandwich, I was getting bored. So I searched the house and found a bathing suit hanging over the and grabbing a towel, I went for a swim. About half an hour later, after doing a bunch of laps, I dry off, put on my clothes, and then Bob arrives for a meeting between 3:30 and 4 p.m. We smile, shake hands, and get down to business. I don't believe anybody like me ever complains openly about his lack of punctuality because, after all, he is Robert Redford. My pal Leo Guerin and I both work in film. Dennis Hopper introduced Leo to me. The young Leo directed off-Broadway plays in New York, works by Jean Genet, Norman Mailer, J.P. Donnelly's The Ginger Man. Then he went to Hollywood, spent time with Ray Stark, labored in some capacity on Antonioni's Zabriskie Point, and made his own crazy drug-addled film, Grasslands, up in South Dakota, or Nebraska, with Gary Busey, Keith Carradine, Scott Glenn, and other actors who eventually became famous. The studio took away his film, recut it as Hex, gave it a curt release in Europe, then retitled it for U.S. consumption as The Shrieking, copyright 1974. Who knows if it was ever shown. Heartbroken, Leo became a screenwriter with credits for some B movies. He suffered from severe manic depression. Manic, he was joyful. Depressed, he was suicidal. So one day Leo sat before me, unable to speak, and wept for half an hour because he was supposed to deliver a treatment next week for a film based on the Eagles' theme album, Desperado, and he couldn't do it. It took me about 48 hours to scribble a treatment for him, laboriously referring to every song from the album throughout. When Leo turned it in, he pocketed his 10 G's, but they never hired him to do a first draft, and the film never got made. But when Leo was enjoying a manic phase, watch out. Like he once wanted me to collaborate with him on a film about rattlesnake roundups in Texas. Gagged me with a spoon, but I agreed. So Leo arranged for us to pitch the rattlesnake roundup flick to to a couple of bigwigs running Rob Reiner's film company in LA. Our pitch laid a really big egg. Leo could bullshit like the announcer of the World Wrestling Federation match, starring Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura, the governor of Minnesota. But I couldn't think of anything to say except that my grandfather had been a noted ichthyologist and herpetologist at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Halfway through our pitch, one of the producers got up and left the room. The other guy started twiddling his thumbs and then playing Scrabble on his cell phone. The fact is, I couldn't pitch a movie if you gave me $1 trillion. All my film jobs just fell out of the blue. Another time with the actor Johnny Cusack and the Christic Institute lawyer Danny Sheehan, I went to TriStar headquarters to pitch a film to Mike Medavoy, the studio head. Johnny Cusack and Danny Sheehan wanted to make a movie about the aftermath of Karen Silkwood's death involving a conspiracy by the U.S. government to smuggle plutonium out of the Kerr-McGee factory in Oklahoma City, where Karen had worked so as to help Israel build their atomic bomb. Perhaps Karen's knowledge of that conspiracy had gotten her killed. When Cusack and Sheehan first approached Medavoy at TriStar, he wanted them to attach, quote, a writer like John Nichols, unquote, to their project. Who the hell was John Nichols? Yet somehow they found my phone number. Then Sheehan and Cusack prepped me for the pitch during 3 hilarious days at the Marina Pacific Hotel in Venice. But I blew it completely. Afterwards, though, Johnny Cusack fell on the floor and was ecstatic. He said, "You shit on Medavoy, you shit on TriStar, you shit on me and Danny, you even shit on yourself. That negative cell just might work." But not in a million years. TriStar never gave us the development bread. Mike Medavoy could detect the BS of an amateur ingenue the second I opened my mouth. During my Hollywood days, I'm obedient. I take my heart pills. I take the diuretics. I avoid salt, caffeine. To keep my Meniere's disease at bay, I drink a lot mostly hard liquor now, bourbon, because it's less histamines than wine and beer. I eat too much. I never gain weight. I jog every day. I exercise. I'm out on the mesa, off in the woods, down at the river, or trekking the high mountains as often as possible. I juggle relationships. I can feel my life coming apart, but I can't stop myself. So in 1985, I take on another script, a 6-hour miniseries for CBS about the life of Pancho Villa and the Mexican Revolution. I start slogging along on the Bible. My personal life is too complicated, hence suddenly I get remarried on Friday, September 13th, 1985, out on the West Mesa of Taos, other side of the gorge. For good luck, Juanita and I buried at our feet a Ken and Barbie doll wrapped in barbed wire. Marriage is hardly the right move, it turns out. But I thought I wanted stability. If I'd really wanted stability, I would have shot myself. We exult in our dangerous excitement, working, playing, hiking, jogging together, going to the movies, arguing about poetry, novels, art, the children, politics, drugs, emotional codependencies, Freud, Jung, Ezra Pound, sex, you know the drill. Too much euphoria, too many emotional minefields. It's up, it's down, there's no in between, no ollie income free. It's either ecstasy or agony, all bound up in erotic arousal all the time. We talk all day and then write long letters to each other every night. She in our bedroom, me out in my novel-writing shack across the driveway. Holy mackerel. In hindsight, 33 years later, all I can say is good fucking luck, Johnny. We lasted together 4 years. Zoom in on New York, probably around 1986, 87, 88. While I'm meeting with the CBS brass about the Pancho Villa project, I get really woozy, sick, and frightened on the rush hour subway. A Manhattan doctor hired by CBS said my EKG read like that of a man who'd had several heart attacks. But I cannot stop the momentum driving me toward a bad end. Life with a new extended family is so convoluted and exhausting. I'm like a flying Walenda, drunk, teetering on the high wire without a balance pole 200 feet above pavement, being attacked by angry birds from a Hitchcock movie. I have thick journals from those days that read like a crazy man high on crystal meth committing suicide. How do I find time to scribble the journals? The clown keeps juggling all these balls. It's showtime. How does the clown do it? Why does the clown do it? How, in the midst of all that confusion and turmoil, can the clown sit down every night at midnight and type on his projects until dawn? 1987 was the year I published A Fragile Beauty, American Blood. In April through May, I pulled off the 12-city book tour with my new wife, Juanita, that we barely survived. Spent a week in New York hassling the Pancho Villa script, then traveled around Europe for 7 weeks with Juanita, a journey we barely survived. Then hunkered down for a week in Bristol, Vermont on location for the filming of my second novel, The Wizard of Loneliness, which stars Leah Thompson and Lucas Haas. Most of the year is a blur of outrageous travels and brutal work. Let's pretend we have a camera focused on a medium shot of yours truly. I'm drunk and singing cowboy songs at a table beside the pool at Redford Sundance Digs with Bill Kittredge, Nanak Smith, and Tom Rickman. Tom wrote the script for Coal Miner's Daughter. Hanek produced the film Heartland. Bill wrote the books Owning It All and Hole in the Sky. We sang my father's favorite song, Little Joe the Rambler. Believe it or not, everybody knew the words. Next day, showing off for my wife Juanita and a couple of other people, I bounced off the end of the diving board and executed a forward 1.5 dive. Only it came out 1 1/4, my face hitting water like a brick wall. That almost knocked me out. My face was bruised and hurting for a week. 47 is not 27, grasshopper. I guess that's what those hectic years are teaching me. Life is nuts. Juanita and I separated in 1989. Divorce followed soon after. Maybe a year or so later, a friend from back east went off the wagon on a visit to Taos for a weekend debauch after 10 years of sobriety, and she called me up for help from a local motel. I hadn't even known she was in town. When I picked her up at the motel, she was bruised, battered, and dirty, and had been gang raped. She resembled a person who just survived a bad car accident. I brought her home, cleaned her up, and gave her some food and a sleeping bag on the futon. When she conked out, my phone rang, and it was a young woman whom I barely knew. She said, "I want you to know that my feelings for you are not just platonic." 2 years later, we got married, and life went head over heels, thrilling and almost killing me. Why is it so alluring to break all the rules? It's scary, but somehow wonderful to be a junkie for the euphoric turbulence of that emotional chaos. Bueno, another year, another dollar. Time flies when you're having fun. It's January 2nd, 1994, and I'm in Taos' Holy Cross Hospital dying of strep endocarditis, a bacterial infection inside my heart, in a private room, hooked up to penicillin and gentamicin IVs, typing up a clean script, Amazonia, for Ridley Scott because it's due next week. When you sign a contract with a delivery date, Hollywood doesn't mean a week after that. It means exactly on the due date, or if possible earlier. That's because every contract emphasizes that, quote, time is of the essence, unquote. It's why they pay you the big bucks. For me, compared to publishing books, Writers Guild minimum wage is big bucks. I'm typing on my old Olympia portable. That year, the endocarditis will lead to congestive heart failure, which would lead to open heart surgery, which would lead to a serious reduction in my activities for a spell. While I was enduring my congestive heart failure mode before the open heart surgery, my publisher sent me on a 10-city book tour for my novel Conjugal Bliss. Why not? I was still alive, wasn't I? There's a little more blood in this stone. Ridley Scott's movie Amazonia was about Kayapo Indians on the Xingu River in the Amazon trying to halt a dam funded by the World Bank from being constructed in their reserve. When Ridley and I met, almost the first words out of his mouth were, "Do you like science fiction movies, John?" My reply, without thinking, I said, "No, I hate them. They bore the shit out of me." I must have been brain dead to say that to the director of Blade Runner and Alien. But I had forgotten. I was hired anyway, really enjoyed the work, and of course, the film project went into turnaround and disappeared. Out in LA, I rented rollerblades and skated on the bike path from Marina del Rey up to Santa Monica Pier and back. On the Venice boardwalk, the muscle dudes were fun, as was the guy who juggled throbbing chainsaws and apples and took a bite out of each apple in midair every now and then. But what I remember most is this occasion. When Costa Gavras and I were driving from Venice over to a meeting with the suits at Universal's Black Tower, he told me about once wanting to make a film of an André Malraux novel set in China called Man's Fate. It was based on the Shanghai insurrection of 1927. Costa had gone to China a few years back and parleyed with the authorities for a while, but their restrictions and demands were impossible, so he had abandoned the project. In this film business, he remarked to me, we don't have the money or the studios, so that's the only real power we have, to take a walk. I started another project with Ridley Scott, a sequel to the 1978 film Midnight Express, about the American Billy Hayes' 5-year stay in a Turkish prison for trying to smuggle hash out of Turkey. The sequel was about Billy's escape from a prison in the Sea of Marmara and then his travels through Asia Minor, Istanbul, and Thrace on his dash to reach freedom in Greece. But when Ridley and one of his co-producers, Mimi Polk, broke up, Mimi took the movie with her. So then I worked with Mimi Polk and Billy Hayes himself on a script. But when Mimi Polk got married, she sold the project to Peter Davis and Bill Panzer, producers best known for their Highlander movies and TV series. So I collaborated with them and Billy Hayes to develop a script. Studio coverage of the initial drafts were great, but Davis Panzer couldn't get the money. Then the money was offered by Tunisia, so they asked me to set the film in Tunisia instead of Turkey. Okay, I did that. Then Tunisia dropped out. Eventually, Mideastern politics freaked out Davis Panzer, so they asked me to switch the story locale to Latin America. Okay, I speak Spanish. Needless to say, things went downhill fast. Finally, the producers asked me to cross a red line that I could not cross, and I bowed out. After that, the film deteriorated into a kind of cheesy Grand Theft Auto Xbox thriller. Then, on vacation in Idaho, Bill Panzer went skating one day, fell on the ice, bumped his head, and died. That ended that project. During the 1990 years, I published some books. The Sky's the Limit, an Elegy for September. Thank you, Natalie, so much. Keep It Simple, and then Conjugal Bliss. I labored on several other novels, a long essay memoir, and various speeches. I wrote on airplanes, in hotel rooms, on the beach, in cafes, in my sleep, whenever and wherever. I always had projects going beside the screenplays, which were actually an aside in my creative meanderings. It's a great life if you don't weaken. But finally, my 2001 book tour for a novel, The Voice of the Butterfly, pretty much ended my life as a player in the New York publishing world. Simultaneously, my screenwriting career hit another brick wall as well after my hilarious first draft of a comedy about Che Guevara and Fidel Castro was hammered by the producer because of his anti-imperialist Marxist politics. What did they expect from Che and Fidel? Jonathan Livingston Seagull? Talk about being pooped out. Enough already. I was 61 years old and begging for another open heart operation. After the psychotic book tour was almost over, I sat down and planned out a memoir of my travels entitled My Midlist Writer Rolling Thunder All-American Book Tour. That's about the most pissed off book I ever wrote. Think of a cross between Naked Lunch, Portnoy's Complaint, and Bonfire of the Vanities. What kind of life was I leading? For emphasis about that hectic life, the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks in New York and D.C. occurred on 9/11. I was slated for one final gig at Toronto's International Festival of Authors on October 16, 2001. But I didn't want to fly across an international border. I'd had it with airplanes. I'd had it with traveling. I'd had it with chaos and smiling at people and being constipated, wishing I could jerk off just to remind myself I was still alive. I needed to take that walk Costa Gavras had explained to me years earlier. So on October 10th, when George W. Bush started bombing Afghanistan, I called up the Toronto organizers And I did something I've rarely done throughout my professional life. I canceled my appearance. I took courage and it nearly smothered me with guilt. But instead of flying to Toronto on October 16, I climbed Lake Fork Peak that casts its shadow in Taos. And on top of that mountain overlooking the world of peaks and alpine slopes that surrounded me. And so it began, my 12 years of fanatical hiking in beautiful high country wilderness that lay practically outside my front door. I decided to decompress from the chaotic life I'd lived up until then. I felt as if I'd finally arrived home safely. I felt like I was home free. Nowadays, 17 years later, I'm 77 years old. I've been single and all alone for 23 years. I lie in bed late at night and in my memory I hear elk bugling. In my memory, I climb up through Engelmann spruce forests and enormous boulder fields and subalpine marshes full of osha, larkspur, and arrowleaf groundsel. I walk past incarnadine paintbrush and alpine gentians. I listen to the songs of hermit thrushes and ruby-crowned kinglets. In my memory, I'm seated among a band of bighorn sheep on the side of Wheeler Peak for 3 hours. We are surrounded by Queen's Crown and shrubby cinquefoil bushes and yellow avens. I've never been happier. I can look across the alpine bowl to Lake Fork Peak and Catherine Overlook and Spoon Mountain. In my memory, I still know that country better than anyone else. I don't care how old or disabled I am, that's still my territory, my blue heaven. I worked so hard to get there at least twice a week, all through my 60s and into my early 70s. I snowshoed all over the Williams Lake Basin in winter. On top of Lake Fork Peak, I could see everywhere back then, and in my memory, I can see everywhere right now. Ravens are performing their acrobatic antics in a space all around me. It's just mountaintops and sky. Sparrowhawks hover in gale-force winds above the ridgeline. These days, my memories are my heroine. So, look at me now and smile if you can. At 77, I walk very slowly, helped by my 2 canes. I can't climb mountains anymore. I wear Job's pressure stockings to keep my varicose veins from killing me. My left knee is blown out, no ACL, no meniscus. My right knee has no ACL and 4 tears in the meniscus. I wear a hernia belt to contain a huge inguinal hernia I've refused to have operated on for the last 10 years. And I am in seriously advanced stages of congestive heart failure. I take many heart pills plus a blood thinner. At night, I breathe oxygen through a nose cannula hose attached to a long green tube affixed to a noisy big blue oxygen concentrator machine. At night, every night, I read, I write, I read, I write, I write and read. I go to bed at 6 or 7 a.m. I set the alarm for 2:30 p.m. Sometimes I sit in a chair at 4 a.m. staring at the mess surrounding me in my little 3-room house. Papers and unanswered letters and books, manuscript boxes and newspapers and magazines are stacked all over the place. Clutter, clutter everywhere, nor any drop to drink. There are file folders on top of the table, on top of the counters, on the desk, on the floor by the bed, in the bathroom. Nothing but clutter. It's a big shitty. There are floor-to-ceiling bookcases in the kitchen, living room, bedroom, even the bathroom. I love to keep working on books. During the 2000s, I published 7 more of them. Taking breaks, I turned my 13-inch TV on and watched the Stanley Cup ice hockey playoffs. But I never watch movies anymore. Been there, done that, I guess. At midnight, I eat pickled beets and Swiss cheese with mayonnaise, lettuce, and a glass of wine. I open my kitchen door at 4 a.m., look at the bright stars, and pray for rain. These days, I doubt I have much more time left to get my act together. But that's okay. Over the years, I got mine. I can feel death galloping toward me like a big happy dog about to jump up and knock me over and exuberantly lick my face. Like Scooby-Doo or an oversized lassie, or maybe one of those cute 101 Dalmatian puppies on growth hormones, but not that rabid Saint Bernard Cujo. That's a movie I didn't care for, and I would never have written the script.
So, two of our finest citizens of Taos, and they said that they'd be willing to answer a couple of questions if anybody is brave enough to ask them.
You know how lucky we are to have heard John tonight.